All right. Well, we're just going to give it a couple more moments here, maybe another minute to let everybody join here in the room. So appreciate everybody's patience, and we will get started here in about one more minute. Thanks. All right. Well, Miriam, Shachi, short no Madam Geisler, no napayam kuichim hachis. And good afternoon to everybody. I believe we have well, almost everybody. I think our friends out in Hawaii, we still may be in the morning time, but for our friends from Alaska and here across the lower 48, I want to welcome you and say good afternoon. My name is Adam Geisler. I am the division chief for the Tribal Connectivity and Nation-to-Nation Coordination Division here at NTIA within the Department of Commerce. And I'm really excited about what we're going to be sharing with everybody today. I know folks are still making their way in the room. We got, looks like 137 folks in so far, and it's an exciting day for us here at NTIA. I'm joined today by a few of my colleagues to talk about all the exciting broadband dollars that are coming available through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that many of you have heard called the Infrastructure Bill. So today I'm joined with a few of my colleagues, Evan Feynman, Angela Bennett, and Miss Sarah Blue, as we dive in to three unique funding mechanisms and get into the discussion about where tribes fit in each of these buckets of money. Before we do that, I am going to give just a quick overview of those buckets of money before we get into the weeds. So with that, Carol, if we could go on to the next slide, please. All right. So as I mentioned, there's three different buckets of money that we're talking about. The Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, lovingly called BEAD. We also have the Digital Equity Act, which you'll hear folks sometimes just simply say DE. And then we have our Middle Mile program, which I know is of interest of a lot of folks on this line in terms of middle mile backhaul capabilities with our Middle Mile program. So we're going to run through each of these, and then we'll have next steps. And at the end, we'll open it up for Q&A. I also wanted to say that at the end, I'll also give an overview of the Tribal Broadband Program as well. As we go through this, please put your questions in the chat. For those of you that may be dialing in and are unable to put a question in the chat, when we get to the Q&A section, I'll go ahead and ask everybody to hit *6 in the event that you are dialing in through the phone. And I also want to point out that, maybe you have colleagues that weren't able to make the session today. We are going to be recording this and posting this on our NTIA website as well. So in the event that friends or colleagues couldn't attend, just as a reminder, this is not your only chance. We will have this posted on our website to watch into the future as well. And we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide, please, Carol. All right, so let's do an overview of the broadband programs as a whole. Next slide, please. All right, so we are talking about quite a bit of money here, well over $46 billion worth of funds. The BEAD program in particular has $42.45 billion. And again, my colleague, Evan Feynman, who oversees the program, will be covering the program in more details. Essentially, this bucket of money is the biggest bucket of money focused on connecting every household in the United States. And that includes tribal households, and it'll be done through a state plan process that tribes are going to need to be included in. And I think that that's the big part to take away with the BEAD program. And again, Evan is going to get into the weeds. Digital equity. We know that the need for equitable access to broadband across communities is also very, very important. There is $2.75 billion available under the Digital Equity Program. And what I want to really point out about the Digital Equity Program is that there is a specific set aside for tribes, in addition to the ability to be included in a state plan for digital equity as well. So there's a couple opportunities within digital equity. My colleague, Miss Angela Bennett, is going to be covering that program in detail. As I mentioned, the Tribal Broadband Program, many of you know, we are continuing to make awards in a rolling basis. Keep your ears open. I know many of you are wanting to hear the latest and the greatest. And what I can tell you is there is big news coming over the course of the next 60 days as we continue our rollout. So I appreciate everybody's patience. Also, we are looking at taking a portion of the $2 billion and putting it towards our current round of applications to extend and make sure folks don't have to reapply, especially when we have good applications that meet the needs of the program. So more to come on tribal. I also want to say that into the future, we will be conducting for a second NOFO. There is going to be a second NOFO released later this year, but we need to close out this program first, this first round. We're then going to engage in consultation. And then as we conclude consultation, that will inform the revisions to the NOFO that we launch later this year. Lastly, I want to talk about the Middle Mile program. It's $1 billion for Middle Mile. We expect it to be very, very competitive. And my colleague Sarah Blue is going to get into the weeds, but if I could just highlight one thing for everybody, tribes are eligible to apply for this program. But you're going to hear Sarah say it, but you hear it from me too. Collaboration and partnership, we believe, is really going to be the key to having a good application and being selected under the Middle Mile program itself. So next slide, please. With regards to the BEAD program, the one thing that, leave it to us here at the federal government, we put a lot of things on slides. The one thing that I'm hoping to flag for everybody is that each state is going to be doing a state plan. And I want you to pay attention to the timeline on the bottom. On July 18th is the deadline for every state in the union and every territory to put forward a plan, to put forward a budget on how they intend to develop their plan for the state for connecting every home within the state. And that includes that plan, and that budget is supposed to include how they're going to engage with tribes. So if you're not talking to your states, and again, Evan is going to get into the weeds here, I just want to highlight everybody for everybody's attention that July 18th is a big date. So I hope everybody is collaborating with their respective state. Next slide, please. Again, very, very, a lot of information on this particular slide, but I'm going to highlight another date. We have a due date of July 12th for the Digital Equity Program. If you are intending to either be a part of the state's plan, the state is going to have to submit an LOI, or if you're going to apply for the set-aside apportionment that Angie's going to cover in a minute, we have a due date of July 12th, and we are going to be circulating through a Dear Tribal Leader letter tomorrow a sample of what that LOI needs to look like. So July 12th for the Digital Equity Act program, get your foot in the door to be able to apply for the program a little bit later on in the year. Next slide, please. Lastly is Middle Mile. And as I mentioned, Ms. Sarah Blue is going to cover this in more detail, but the window is already open for Middle Mile, and it closes on 9/30 of this year. So for those of you that are wondering, when did the window open? It's open. NOFO's on the street. Again, we'll be covering in more detail here in a moment, but I just want to highlight a couple of these key dates. So July 18th, July 12th, and then we have 9/30 of 2022 as well. And with that, we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. And soon you will be done hearing from me. So involvement of tribal entities, again, guys, is the focus of what we have today. As a reminder, please put your questions in the chat. We'll address those as we at the end of the presentation. And with that, we'll go on to the next slide. And we're going to start to jump into the details of our BEAD, Digital Equity, and Middle Mile programs. I'm sure a lot of you have questions about what really is entailed within the BEAD program. What does that mean? So this particular presentation has been tailored to make sure that we're very clear about where tribes fit in each of these three programs. Again, we're talking about over $46 billion in funding between the three programs. So BEAD, Digital Equity, and Middle Mile. And with that, I am now going to stop talking and I'm going to turn it over to a colleague and friend of mine, Mr. Evan Feynman, to go over in detail the BEAD program. Over to you, Evan.
Thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. I'm really looking forward both to sharing with you some of what we're working on and also hearing from you and answering your questions as we get into the latter half of the conversation today. This is a really exciting moment. The first thing that people should know about the BEAD program and about the totality of these programs together is that this is the programmatic effort that is going to get every single home and business in all 50 states and 6 territories online, period. This is the moment that happens. It's an incredibly exciting time to be working on this kind of project. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you to ensure that the people and places that you care about are well served. So if we could move on. First, we want to talk about ways in which you guys can get engaged. First, work with your state or territory office. That's absolutely critical. This program contemplates a very different model. We are not going to sit in DC and pick every project. Rather, the states are the primary actors here with our guidance and support in developing programs that are going to work to ensure that every single person within their state or territory borders gets online. And so first and foremost, they are going to work with you and you're going to work with them to ensure that the programs and plans they put together are strong and that the decisions they make are the right decisions to serve your communities. Second, you can be or own or contract for infrastructure that's built or program that's run to ensure connectivity and access for your citizens. So moving on, let's talk about that a little more. If we could advance the slide. Yep, great. Tribal entities are eligible to be a subgrantee of an eligible entity. And this is all, we have to use this language because it's in the notice of funding opportunity, but an eligible entity is a state or territory government. And then a subgrantee is, because they're the grantees, a subgrantee is anybody that receives grant funds to do something that the program contemplates them doing. Those different things that they might do include either building infrastructure or engaging in digital equity activities. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. But first, how are we going to figure out how much money actually goes to each state and territory? We've based it on, and if we could look at the next slide, we've based it on the best understanding available now and in the future of how much work needs to be done to ensure that every home and business location and community anchor institution gets online. So new coverage maps are going to be utilized. All of the old maps that were based on locations in a census block and reports from the industry are in the garbage, guys. The FCC is going to create a new set of maps that is going to, working with a much more detailed data set, identify every single home and business location, every place that could take service in the United States, and determine whether or not those are served or unserved. We're then going to use those maps, and those will be imperfect at first. I want to be clear about that. They know that. We know that. There's a process by which they'll be improved. But then NTIA is going to use those maps to allocate funds across the various states and territories to ensure that funding is tailored to the job in front of folks. Each eligible entity, which is to say state or territory government, is going to get either 100 million if you're a state, you're DC or Puerto Rico, or you'll get a minimum of 25 million if you're one of the other 4 territories. The allocation is based on a somewhat complex formula, but at the end of the day, it comes down to how many very expensive places to reach do you have, and then how many other unserved places do you have. Those run through a formula, they spit out a number. That's how, after the maps come out, which will be toward the end of this calendar year, we'll figure out how many places there need service. So moving on to the next slide, what are we then going to do with those funds? Well, first and foremost, each state and territory is going to get every single location that is below 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. That is to say, places that are unserved at all or unserved by anything that you could functionally call broadband internet. Those locations will get served. After we're sure that those locations will be served, underserved locations, places that get between 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload, and 100 over 20, 100 megabits per second download and 20 megabits per second upload will also get served. The last priority is ensuring that community anchor institutions have symmetrical gigabit connectivity. Now, I listed all of those. I said this, then this, then this. That is an order of priority. It is not an order of time. In fact, what we anticipate is that states will ensure that we're able to serve all of those goals at once and then more. Funding that is left over beyond what's necessary to do those 3 goals can then be spent on digital equity, digital inclusion, digital literacy, digital entrepreneurship, affordability, and other programming that falls under the digital equity umbrella. This is going to be a complicated process, unfortunately, and complicated processes require a lot of different steps. So if you look at the next slide, what you'll see is the way in which we are going to support each state and territory in developing the plan they need to make this work. So there's a lot on this slide. There's been a lot on a lot of these slides. We apologize for that. But I hope you take comfort in the fact that we're thinking carefully about this, and we're going to be serious about getting the details right so that we get this program right and every single person in the United States has the opportunity to get online. What each state will do is submit to us a letter of intent and then a plan for spending the right out of the gate $5 million that they can get to develop a 5-year action plan. This is the highest level look at the way in which a state or territory intends to get everybody online. We're going to review that. We'll go back and forth. Our staff on the ground, and I should emphasize that we're going to have staff in nearly every state in the union and every territory. Any state that doesn't have a direct staffer will have a staffer in an adjacent state who's covering both states. They are going to be the first line of defense and the first line of assistance when it comes to making sure that folks are hearing from us and that folks have an ability to be in dialogue both with us and the state office. After the 5-year plan, states will prepare an initial proposal. This is going to describe the means by which they will select subgrantees. We will approve that or not and then distribute funds. And then there will be a final proposal, which is kind of after they've turned the machine on, they've made their subgrantee selections. Then, that's where we know every single project, this company, this electric co-op, this tribe, this wireless company, whomever, they're going to build in this place, that place, and the third place. That's the most detailed option. We will then approve that, and the remainder of the funding will go out the door. I want to be really clear that at each stage in this process, there will be opportunity for lots of different stakeholder groups to get engaged. And in particular, moving on to the next slide, tribal entities are going to be engaged in a robust, ongoing fashion. This is not going to be state and territory offices putting something out, creating an email inbox and saying, hey, you guys can submit comment, which maybe they'll read, maybe they won't. Rather, there must be ongoing, robust collaboration with local, regional, and tribal entities. And we're going to want to see that. We're going to need to see that described by the state and territory actors. Our staff are also going to be independently verifying that activity and reaching out to you directly to ensure that your concerns are being met. At each stage of the game, we want you to be engaged with your members, the folks that you serve, and also be engaged with us. If at any point you have concerns that the 5-year plan, the initial proposal, or the final proposal is going to fail to meet the needs of your community, let us know right away. I can't promise you that the final conclusion of each concern you raise will be the conclusion you wanted. What I can promise you is that we are going to get to the bottom of every single concern that you raise for us, and we are going to ensure that you get a full and robust hearing and that we meet your concerns and then come up with the best answer we possibly can. So looking forward on the next slide, the BEAD program is going to ensure that first, there's full geographic coverage, and that coverage, when it's on tribal lands, is really deeply engaged with you. You have to be given the opportunity first to submit any plan that's eligible. You're also going to have the opportunity to comment on plans that are in your communities or on tribal lands, and they must be done if they're on tribal lands with your consent. There's going to be a ton of different stakeholders that are consulted. We're here talking to y'all about tribal work, but just so you know, other disaffected communities, minority communities, rural communities, low-income communities, a wide variety of stakeholders, different issue-based stakeholders, whether it be environmental, education, industry specific. All of those different stakeholder groups are going to be brought into the process and consulted. We are also going to be building coalitions in every single state and territory that are going to be tremendous vehicles by which we are able to disseminate information and tables around which people can sit and be heard. As I said before, this is going to be transparent throughout the process. No one should ever be surprised at any stage in this game. And then, as I said, underserved and underrepresented communities are key targets for us in that outreach. So looking forward at the next slide, as I said, tribal entities are going to be able to serve as subgrantees. So you may be the people who are either running digital equity programming or constructing either yourselves or through subcontractors or other folks you hire infrastructure either on or off of tribal lands. This can fund unserved or served project areas, middle mile infrastructure. Unlike our middle mile program, which we'll hear about a little later, there has to be an anchor tenant right out of the gate if middle mile is constructed under BEAD. Everybody's literate, you can read. I'm not going to read this slide to you, but there are a lot of other ways in which folks are able to engage with each of the subgrantee selections that are made. Moving on to the next slide, the NTIA suggests that eligible entities include local and tribal coordination as project selection criteria. So we were not able to define every single necessary criteria in project selection. So some things we're encouraging putting forward as best practices. But what I will tell you is that you're going to have, as I said, the opportunity to weigh in on every single one of these. And we strongly encourage each of the states as they develop their subgrantee selection process to require or provide additional points for coordination with local governments, with tribal governments, and with other communities that are necessary. This piece that the slide's getting at here between priority broadband projects and non-priority broadband projects, effectively, a priority broadband project is one that is a fiber project and that meets the other requirements that are laid out there below, that it meets the minimum, that it's affordable, that there's fair labor practices, that it'll be built quickly. If there are non-fiber projects that are competing, they're going to be chosen based on a number of different scoring factors. Again, you can see our priorities there, and then additional priorities that the state or territory government might adopt. Moving on to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about what tribal entities might do should they win subgrant. Two big categories, right? The first is infrastructure to get folks online. That can be building new infrastructure, leasing new infrastructure, deploying equipment that will better utilize infrastructure. And one of the things that I want to be really clear about here is in previous efforts, connection to a building that had multiple residential units in it was adequate to call that area served. That is no longer true. And so there may be a large number of multifamily buildings that need wireless equipment so that the connection is actually useful. That is an eligible deployment use. Additionally, personnel costs, network security upgrades, training and workforce development so that we're able to serve all these projects on an ongoing basis. Those are all the infrastructure related pieces. Then there's also non-infrastructure related pieces, which have to do with training, remote learning, digital literacy, digital equity planning, sign-up assistance, multilingual outreach, et cetera. Again, y'all can read, but a lot of different eligible activities under this program. Moving on to the next slide to talk about what you need to be able to do to qualify as a subgrantee. First and foremost, practically what you need to do is engage with your state and territory government so you see this process happening and you understand exactly all of the specific details of your state or territory subgrantee process as they move forward. But in general, one, you got to have a contractor or be yourself somebody who is got a good track record of implementing the sorts of project or program that you're planning to implement. You got to have the financial capability, you got to have the managerial capability, you got to have the technical capability, you got to follow the law. It really ought to go without saying, but here we are. You got to have the operational capability. We got to know who you are, and we got to understand what all the sources of capital are that are coming into a project. All of those are really important, but to bring it back to the core piece of information that I want to communicate out, we want to make sure it is absolutely critical for our success that tribal entities be a part of this process. If at any point in any state you have concerns or you think you will be poorly served or underserved or unserved by the project selection criteria, by the projects that are being selected, or by the plan that's being put forward, let the state or territory office know, but also let our team know. We want to hear from you. I'm committing over and over again. I promise you, we will track down and get to the bottom of every concern that you raise with our team. We must do that so that we can all share confidence that your communities are going to be really well served. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to getting into the Q&A. And with that, I believe I turn it over to my colleague, Angie.
Hey, thanks, Evan. All right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I will talk to you about the significant role of the tribal community in our Digital Equity Act. Next. So as Adam shared, in the Digital Equity Act, there are actually two opportunities for the tribal community to participate and receive funding. There is a set aside for tribes, and there's also an opportunity for tribes to be engaged as sub-grantees through the states. Next. Okay, so Digital Equity Act created 3 programs. 2 of the programs, the funds flow through the state, and then the third one, there's a competitive. On May 13th, we released the NOFA with regard to the state planning grants. Based on the state planning grant, states will submit an application to us and have 1 year to develop a state digital equity plan. And then they will then submit that plan for a state capacity grant. And so this is the funding that's available directly to the states, where they can make sub-grants to the tribals, the tribal community. Let's see, next slide. Okay, the 5% set aside. So this is where this Digital Equity Act provides not less than 5% to be set aside for tribal entities. So that equates to about $15 million. In this initial round, everyone, states, territories, and tribal entities have a deadline of July 12th to submit their either application or letter of intent. We expect to allocate between $50,000 to $150,000 per tribal entity, depending on how many apply for the funding. So let me go into the exact details of what you need to do. Next, please. Here we go. You can go next. We kind of talked about the set asides. Okay, so here are the digital equity plan requirements. And this is for states and for tribals, tribal communities. Some examples, and just so you know, following this webinar, and I believe tomorrow we're sending out emails to everyone where you will receive a sample letter of intent, along with this list of examples of digital inclusion activities that you can include in your letter of intent for the funding. But important items to know that you can include for a planning grant is to identify the barriers to digital equity. What are some of the measurements? What are some of the resources that you have available? How will you, engage with stakeholders? And with the states, this is really key where, and I actually spoke to a state who was looking to also, make sub-grants to their tribal entities, as well as encourage tribal entities to apply for their own funding as well. Just having states rely and really leverage the relationships with the tribal entities to collaborate with the key stakeholders, because they are the ones that are on the ground that are very familiar with with the barriers to digital equity and including them and making sure that they have a space at the state table in developing a plan to address those barriers as well as measure them. Next, please. And this is some additional activities that will be included in the digital equity plan. As I discussed, the asset inventory, what's the coordination and outreach strategy, implementation, really coordinating all of the different efforts that are currently underway and ensuring that we're not duplicating and being able to identify the gaps that this funding can help meet. Next. So tribal entities are among the key stakeholder groups that states are required to coordinate with in developing their plans. And that could include, various community anchor, institutions, other nonprofits, organizations that represent our covered, populations and as well as, public housing authorities. Next. Okay. What do you need to do? The deadline is July 12th. Unlike states, tribal entities only have to submit a letter of intent. And here's a template that we will provide to you. All you have to do is literally put this on your letterhead and just say to us, yes, we want digital equity planning grant funds, and have your leader sign it. And you have 3 ways to send it back to us. You can either email it, you can mail it, or you can upload it into our portal. And so there's 3 parts to it: the signature of the leader, the second, a description of the entity that will administer the digital equity programs, like who is that administering entity that will manage this, and then a list of specific activities. And we have it attached to the sample letter of intent. We have a list of sample activities that you could, pursue. Next. Here, I talked about the 3 submission methods. And if you, while we do encourage you to use the grants portal, you are not required to use the grants portal. You can just email it to us, or you can mail it. And if you mail it, it must be postmarked no later than 11:59 p.m. On July 12th. And once you submit your letter of intent, we will reach out to you and let you know, what are the next steps in applying for the funding. So July 12th is the deadline everyone will submit. After July 12th, we'll be able to determine the number of tribal entities that did signal and request planning funding, and then we'll be able to determine, what the allocation is from there between, as I stated, $50,000 to $150,000 per tribal entity. Next. And here are instructions to access the grants portal, which I won't take you through. But if you have questions, if you are electing to use the grants portal and you have questions, please reach out to us and we can, help walk you through this. Next. Okay. And next. All right. And so here again are some additional instructions on uploading your letter of intent if you elect to use our grants portal. Next. All right, at this point, I will turn it over to Sarah Blue of our Middle Mile program. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. I am happy to be here. Thanks for giving us some time to talk to you today. I'll just try to stick to the high-level points on the Middle Mile program over the next couple of minutes so that we can leave some free time for Q&A. Let's take a look at the next slide, please. And we can just skip over the middle mile. Well, I'll point out is that it is a competitive grant program, and all tribal entities are able to directly apply for this program. Let's go on to the next slide. Middle mile infrastructure. I think about it. There's the internet backbone, which is that big global thing that takes all of the crazy cat videos all over the place. The last mile is that connection which goes into your house. Middle mile is what connects the internet backbone to the last mile network. I'm here in Colorado, and so I would think, for example, like Denver to Rocky Fords, Colorado. Rocky Fords is kind of a way out there. It's not on the internet backbone. So getting Rocky Fords, the town of it, up to Denver is considered middle mile. This, we are technology agnostic in this application. We are going to be looking, there might be fiber, there might be wireless solutions. We even have an other in case there's something totally sustainable out there that we have no idea what it is. This might be leased dark fiber. It might be submarine cable. It might be towers. It might be microwave links. There's a lot that you can do with middle mile. And so we are not ruling anything out. The main thing that I will point out, though, is because it is a competitive program, we expect that the $1 billion that's available is going to go pretty quickly. And I am strongly encouraging collaborations and partnerships. There's nobody who should be doing this alone. You could, but I think that it would be a good idea to look at collaborating and partnering. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Here, very quickly here, as you can see, an eligible entity for this program is a tribal government, a state political subdivision, or a whole bunch of different industry partners. It might be a nonprofit, and it might be any of these entities on their own, or again, the big word here, partnership, collaboration, might be a couple of these. Let's go on to the next slide, please. The money, the $1 billion that's available might be used for the construction or acquisition of facilities or equipment. It might be used for engineering, design, permitting, work related to environmental work. It might be your personnel. And there's some pre-application expenses that are allowed up to $50,000 after the NOFO is published, which was May 13th, and before the grant is awarded. Let's go over to the next slide, please. Thank you. Here I'm going to talk really quickly about what to expect. Like I said, the NOFO was published for middle mile on May 13th. The applications will be accepted through the end of the day on September 30th of this year. And we will be making awards by March of next year. So the money is real and it's getting out there very soon. We are going to open up the portal, the same URL that Angie showed you a few minutes ago. We are only accepting applications through our portal, and that will be open very shortly. We are going right now, if you go to the Internet for All website, if you go to middle mile, we've got some FAQs that have been posted. We also have a checklist. So you can, as you read the NOFO, if you're interested in applying, you can begin look at the checklist to see what kinds of documents, what kinds of templates we're going to be asking for. You're going to get all this into the application, and then there are going to be a few different reviews that occur. First, we'll have eligibility, then we'll have merit, and then finally we'll have programmatic. In eligibility, we're making sure that the application is complete and that the entity is eligible. And like I said, as long as you are a tribal entity, you are eligible. Merit review and prioritization, we are going to have some reviewers here scoring the applications. They're going to be looking at project purpose and benefits and sustainability, and they will be scoring up to 100 points. The average of those applications, which is greater than 80 and meets 2 of 5 statutory criteria. Those will be prioritized as we go into programmatic review, which I'll talk about in a little bit further. Let's go on to the next slide, please. In eligibility, we'll go into details here, but we want to make sure that the applicant is capable of doing everything that they are applying to do, that the project will support retail broadband service. We're asking for a match of at least 30%. I'd like to point out that tribal entities may request a waiver for that match amount for partial or complete. After that, we're also looking for a binding commitment to prioritize either connecting infrastructure to last mile networks in unserved areas. And when you read the NOFO, you'll see that tribal governments can attest to their own unserved areas. Or we're looking for a binding commitment to connecting non-contiguous trust lands. Or finally, that you will offer wholesale broadband service at reasonable rates. The fifth eligibility criteria is to offer interconnection in perpetuity where it's technically feasible. And that just means, back to my example of connecting Rocky Ford's Colorado up to Denver, that if I determined that I was going to have a POP in Pueblo, that meant having interconnection in perpetuity means that I would allow other providers to meet me in Pueblo. Let's go over to the next slide here. This is a lot of information, and everybody gets to take this deck home. So if you want to really drill into it, you get to do that. I'm not going to talk to all of it because I think that it's very self-explanatory that we are looking for to make sure $1 billion is a lot of money, and it's a lot of money, and we don't want to waste it. So we're going to make sure that those applicants who are applying have the financial, managerial, technical capabilities, that your compliance with laws, like Evan mentioned earlier, that you've got operational capabilities, and we want to know a little bit about the ownership of the applicant. This is because we're also allowing ISPs and telcos to apply. Let's go on to the next slide, please. This is the merit portion. So we will go through initial. We're going to reach out to you during initial, and we're going to ask you to help us fill in the missing questions. Those applicants who pass through initial will go on to merit. And like I said earlier, merit's going to score the applications, looking at project purpose and benefits, and also the project sustainability. And you can see how all the points break out here. We're really looking for reaching unserved and underserved. Interconnection, we want open access, we want redundancy possibly, or having direct interconnect facilities. We're looking for the organizational capabilities. We're looking for the reasonableness of the budget. And we're looking to make sure that this is something that this $1 billion is something that's going to be around beyond the award period of 5 years. So we're looking for fiscal sustainability. Let's go to the next slide, please. I did talk about this a few minutes ago, that those merit review scores, which average greater than 80 and meet 2 of 5 statutory criteria, will be prioritized in programmatic. And what you see here on the right are the 5 statutory criteria that we're looking for. Again, you'll see fiscally sustainable strategies. We're looking for non-discriminatory interconnect. We're looking for a connection to last mile providers. We don't want you to just build middle mile. We need this to reach unserved and underserved with your partners. We're looking for supplemental investments or in-kind support, like can you expedite permitting fees, for example, so that this project will be done quicker? Or finally, the national security interests. And the next slide, please. Programmatic, this will be where NTIA reviews the merit scores to make sure that everything's understood and well documented, and that the strengths and weaknesses are explicit. And then we are going to be reviewing each application based on one of these 8 criteria. There will be a weighting factor, and these criteria again are here on the right. And that's the goal of the whole program is to reduce end user, to bring people to the internet. And so that's making it more affordable. It's bringing the access there. And so that's a lot of what you see here is that reducing end user prices, or for example, reducing latency. If you were building a more direct submarine cable, for example, that turned into a lower latency to reach a more remote or insular area. Benefiting priority groups, unserved areas, or tribal lands will be rated in this. Connecting unserved community anchor institutions. We've also got climate resiliency. We've got select requirements like fair labor and workforce development, as well as proposed use of community benefit agreements. And the next slide, please. And really quickly, I want to make sure everybody understands. The NOFO was released on May 13th. The application will be made available very shortly. Keep an eye on our internetforall.gov website. You will only be able to apply for the middle mile program through the portal. And we will only be accepting applications through September 30th. And then we're going to make money available. So I'm going to wrap up right there. I'm going to hand back off to Adam. And I think that we can take some questions if there's anything you'd like to talk about further. Thanks.
Awesome. All right, we'll go ahead and go on to the next slide, Carol. We'll do one more. All right, so I know first off, this slide deck is going to be posted to the website. So for those of you that are concerned about or feverishly taking notes, don't worry. We're not hiding the slides. They will be made available. First and foremost. Additionally, if you have follow-up questions from today, go ahead and send them in to the internetforall@ntia.gov. I'm always going to encourage you guys to sign up for our webinars. We were joking with the team earlier about how many we've done here in the last 30 days, and I think that it's well over 10 or 11. So if you have not been or are not on our listserv, I'm going to ask you to join that and make sure that you are attending our webinars. We also record them and post them. So again, this one will be up on our website here pretty quick. Additionally, prepare a letter of intent for the State Digital Equity Planning Grant Program by July 12th. So for digital equity, right, that's the pot of money that Angie oversees, Miss Bennett there. And it's an important date that the LOI get established. And I know that there are some questions get submitted. And I know there's some questions about consortiums, and we're going to jump into that in just a minute. We're not going to cut this thing off right at the top of the hour. We're going to do our best to get through most of your questions. But one thing that I do want to say is, yes, we do want to see an individual letter from the entity. So if you're an organization that is a leader or a consortium, this is an instance where we're still going to want to see the LOI come in from the tribe itself or from the eligible entity. And if they name you as the body that will administer the funds or be the player for the program, that's fine. But it does need to come from the eligible entity itself. So I just want to point that out. And yes, July 12th. As a reminder, tomorrow, our agency is going to be sending out a Dear Tribal Leader letter to all of the federally recognized tribes and copying the sample LOI and eligible activities there. So keep an eye out in your email box tomorrow. That is forthcoming. As Sarah mentioned with the Middle Mile program, the application window is open now. I'm going to encourage you guys one more time to be working with your states. Now is the time to be collaborating across land use jurisdictions to come up with the most robust plans to meet the needs of your communities. There's money going to states, there's money going to tribes, there's money going to local governments. There's subsidies out there for the service when the infrastructure is built. And now's the time to collaborate with everybody. So I'm going to promote that over and over and over again. And the other thing I wanted to highlight with the BEAD program that Evan oversees is that, as you've heard, we're requiring states to ensure the tribal households are connected. And that also means that they need to be ensuring that they're doing the outreach process. And so, again, every state right now is working on a budget on how they're going to spend that $5 million of planning. And now is the time for you to reach out to your respective state leadership, whether it's the broadband office or the tribal advisor for the governor. Each state is different. Knock on that door and ensure that you have a seat at that table. Some states are looking to fund consultants or chairman's associations or individual tribes. It's all different across the map. But what I do want to point out is now is the time to be knocking on those doors and building those relationships to make sure that we are raising it, but we also are encouraging tribes, obviously, to work directly with your states, because you all saw the potential for being sub-grantees as a part of every state plan that's out there. And again, as Evan mentioned, our expectation is that every household that is not connected in every state will be connected. That is the mission and the direction of our secretary and the intent of the law. So with that being said, I'm going to jump into the Q&A. And for those of you that weren't on when we addressed the tribal broadband program at the very beginning, the first handful of questions are about the tribal broadband program. So I'm going to jump into those real quick. So Sam asks, any word on the tribal broadband connectivity grants? We are continuing to make awards on a rolling basis, and hang on to your seats. In the next 60 days, you guys are going to see a lot of really big announcements coming out the door, again, in a rolling fashion. That also means that we will be sending out pretty soon notifications for those that may not have passed in the process as well. I apologize, we weren't able to send those any of these notifications out sooner, but we have been kind of bound by our grant program requirements. And so working around those is not always easy and definitely takes time. The next question was, how do we learn of the status of our applications submitted this fall? I'm going to continue to say no news is good news. As I mentioned, at some point here in the very near future, you're going to see notifications if you are unsuccessful, and you'll be notified. If you do not hear from us, then you're either in consideration for full funding or for partial funding up to $500,000, up to $500,000 if you are a federally recognized tribe. When will broadband tribal connectivity webinar be held? I'm assuming, Rima, that is for the second NOFO. And the answer to that is, as soon as we're done making all these awards, I'm going to say towards probably the end of the summer is when we're likely going to conduct additional consultations. And then we will have publish our NOFO, and then we'll have, just like you guys are seeing here today, webinars to go over any revisions to the NOFO or the submission process. Obviously, lessons learned with this go around. And so I appreciate everybody's patience, and we continue to look forward to making improvements to the program to meet the needs of Indian country. I'll also highlight this first round of applications identified over 180,000 unserved Indigenous households in just the first round. And that we all recognize that that's not everybody. That's just those that were prepared to do infrastructure deployment today. There's many of you that applied for planning alone, and we realize the number is greater. So BEAD is the BEAD middle mile digital equity is that next big step that we want everybody to get engaged in. Now is the time to get engaged. The next question, is it difficult to prepare an application for these new broadband programs when we don't know the status of the tribal grants we submitted last fall? Sam, you asked this question, such as, will we get fully funded or partially or nothing? I guess what I'm going to say is, one, your efforts are not for naught. Whether you're funded or not, you should be sharing what you wanted to do with your states. Many of you that applied to the tribal broadband program, those plans and what you intended to do is exactly what you should be sharing with your respective states and what you'd like to see as the solution on your lands. And Evan, I'm not sure if you wanted to add a little bit more context to that in terms of the tribal consent and taking into consideration how tribes want service on their lands.
Sure, happy to. First I would say they're your land. So, consent is critical. I know there are a lot of different, when you look from state to state, there are a lot of different ways in which those lands are defined, right? There's the difference between the way tribal lands are treated in Alaska versus Montana. Hawaii is in an entirely different category. But what I can tell you is the one of the great strengths and from my side complexities of this program is that we get to tailor the way it's implemented in each state to the needs of that state. And so what I would say, which I'm going to keep coming back to, is get engaged early and stay engaged throughout with the state or territory broadband office so that you can make sure that however tribal lands or tribal relations or tribal consultation works in your state, you can enshrine that in the program. Or candidly, if you don't like how that works in your state, get a better version of that into the program. And the door to our team is always going to be open. And so if you don't like what you're hearing at the state office, come and talk to us and share your concerns.
Hey, Adam, can I quickly just address the concern about applying for the funding while they're waiting to hear the
Absolutely.
results? So you don't have to wait.
Exactly.
You don't have to wait. So the only thing, for the digital equity program, it's to develop a digital equity plan. And so all you have to do is submit a letter of intent just to say, I want the money. And then after July 12th, we'll, let you know how much is available. This is money that has been set aside. So you don't have to compete for it. You don't have to, push your way for a seat at the table. These are your dollars that have been set aside for you. And all you have to do is just send us that letter of intent saying, I want the money. And then you will have time, to develop, you have 1 year to develop a plan, at which time you will be notified, of the other funding, but just don't wait to hear back before you say you want the money. It's your money.
That's right. I'm glad you said that, Angie. I mean, just to highlight, we wanted to make this process as least burdensome as possible on the onset. So again, folks, for the digital equity dollars, it's really as simple as sending us the letter, the sample. You're going to get the template, your tribal leader. So for those of you that are or may not be your tribal leader, by tomorrow afternoon, you should be messaging your tribal leader saying, hey, did you get the email from NTIA? Because there's that sample. And in the event that for some reason that doesn't happen, we have all these formal processes, but guys, you can email me, you can email Evan, you can email Angie, you can email Sarah. We all talk every day. We text every day. We easily can send each other messages. So don't feel like, if you didn't write down a name or an email address, we can get you to where you need to go. And I think we're really taking a whole of government approach, even internally here with an NTIA across our departments. So don't let that hold you back. The other thing we were asked was about the availability of the PowerPoint by Celeste. Celeste, we think we've shared already. We're going to make this publicly available. So yes, we have no problem. And Macy, if you don't mind, looks like we have a low-hanging fruit here. Celeste is there. So if you don't mind just sharing that, the PowerPoint with her, we'd appreciate it. Evan, I think this is a question for you, and this is related to the FCC maps. When will those maps be published? Good question.
So there's a lot about the maps that we could talk about. When will they be published? Well, so the FCC chair said to Congress a little while ago now that the best guess for that, their target was November. There was some hedging in that, if I recall that answer correctly. So, but November is the target that we should shoot for. That will be the initial release of the maps. As I said, it's a tremendously challenging undertaking to identify and locate on maps every single location that could take service. FCC needs people to support them in getting those maps accurate. Those maps will drive the allocation that each state and territory gets, but they are not the last word in where infrastructure is built. So I also want to emphasize that we will be building infrastructure to all of the places indicated by the process that the state and territory offices generate, so that we can ensure that we get to every location, regardless of what the FCC maps. They're the beginning, not the end of the conversation about where served and unserved folks are.
And while we're on this, because I'm sure folks are also wondering, well, do we have to live with whatever the FCC comes up with? So is there any type of challenge process to that mapping?
Two types, helpfully both called challenge processes. So, that additional confusion is our gift to y'all. The first challenge process is to the FCC maps themselves. That is an opportunity for both internet service providers and for other stakeholders to say, hey, there is service here, or hey, there is not service there. Your maps are incorrect as regards this location or these locations. There will then be a second challenge process as projects are selected by each state to say, hey, you left out this area in this county, in this project that purports to get to universal coverage in this county. Or, hey, you are planning to build to this area of this county and our network already covers these locations in that project area. That second item, and then the opportunity for all of those projects to be published and put in front of the citizens of those communities, that second process is how we're sure, to the best of our ability, that everybody in those communities gets served, because it comes to y'all. If whether you're talking about on tribal lands or just the city or county or town that you live in, you're going to get to see the project that's supposed to get you and all your neighbors online. If it doesn't do that, jump up and down and start shouting. We're going to hear you. We'll get there. We'll figure it out.
Awesome. So the next question, I think, is still along we're going kind of as they were coming into the chat during the BEAD conversation. So will each state with federally recognized tribes have a tribal set aside? And I believe this was related to the BEAD program specifically.
No, the funds are allocated to each state and territory, period, based on the number of high cost locations they have and then the number of unserved locations that they have. That said, we don't need there to be a tribal set aside, because whatever it costs to get the job done for every citizen in that state, that's what we're going to do. There will be instances in which the cost is a driver of changes in technology. So, for example, a location that is 30 miles away from the nearest road or utility pole or fiber network may not get $30 million spent to get a fiber up to that location. We may come up with a wireless solution for that location, but regardless, what we're going to do is make sure that everybody gets online and everybody has the ability to get online.
Right. So just to reiterate, there is no tribal specific set aside for BEAD. That doesn't mean, tribes, that you can't be advocating for those types of things in your state's plan to your state. Respect. I say that
Certainly,
recognizing the sovereign boundaries of reservations, but you understand what I'm saying. And for some of you that are in multiple states, Navajo, Crit, Duck Valley, etc., guys, you're gonna have to have those conversations with both states if you have households in multiple states. Some of you are in 2, some of you in 3, some of you in 4. So I guess I should also put that out there. And this next question is along the same lines. It looks like it comes from somebody representing the Seminole Tribe of Florida. Tribes can only be subgrantees, correct, Evan? That is a correct statement, Rose, in terms of them only being subgrantees. Again, it's the way the statute.
Not only, that's better. The eligible entity has to do all this work, and they don't even get to keep the money. They got to give it all away. Being a subgrantee is where it's at, guys.
They're on the hook for the reporting and the implementation, right? I mean, that's I think you raise a good point there, Evan, if there is a silver lining. So since each tribe is expected to work with their state, will NTIA have subgrantee agreement language available? And I think this is kind of in that vein of not everybody has great relationships with their states, Evan. And so I'm sure there's some concerns about states putting tricky language in there. Are we going to be facilitating any of that?
We're going to be involved in the conversation. And if there's a concern raised about certain provisions, rules, scoring metrics, any aspect of the state program, we want to hear about it so that we can get engaged and track it down. Because every state is different, because all state law is different, and down all the way at the root of it, because every state's contract law is different, it's not really practical for us to publish a model subgrantee agreement. That's got to, well, I don't know that we do a great job, candidly, right? We'd have to do a bunch of legal research for 50 states and 6 territories. Rather, if that's a concern, if there's a specific piece of that's a concern, just let us know, and we will engage with the state to ensure that concern is addressed.
They're on the hook to get the connectivity, right? I mean, that's always going to be the bigger issue at hand. So even if we're not prescriptive about language, I think, Evan, your point is that we're going to bring parties together to figure this out.
Yeah, every time anybody thinks about any aspect of this program, the thing you got to start from is whatever the thing is that we need to do to get everybody online that's legal is what's going to happen. Right. We're solving backward from that end goal, not merely mechanistically applying whatever we come up with or the states come up with.
So I think the next agreement is in terms of allocating funds. Do all unserved locations in an entire state have to be served before you start connecting underserved? So what's the preference or priority, or is there a priority, Evan, when it comes down to unserved versus underserved and how the money goes out?
Yeah, so I tried to address this when I was talking about it, and I try to do that every time. And every time I get this question, so I'm doing a bad job communicating about that sequence. And so I welcome any stylistic critiques that people might be able to offer me on that. When we say you have to do all the unserved before you do the underserved, we mean that in order of priority, not in order of time. In an ideal world, every single one of these BEAD activities, unserved, underserved, community anchor institution connectivity, and digital equity programming, all happens at once. The thing that we have to be confident of, though, is as we walk up that chain, the resources are in place adequate to do each step before we start spending resources on the next. So if you got $100, it's going to cost you $30 to get your unserved online, $30 to get your underserved online, $20 to get your anchor institutions online, and you want to spend $20 on digital equity. We're going to want to look at the underlying cost assumptions in each of those categories to make sure that if you get cost overruns or you get construction delays or all these other things, that you're not going to have spent the money on priorities 2, 3, or 4 and leave priority 1 high and dry. So we'll just say, be sort of small c conservative in your estimates. It's always better to come in under budget, right? And that we're going to drive that through at the state and territory level as well.
Perfect. So this next one, and it's Denise, good to see you're online from the Native Village of Port Lions. I think I got this one, Evan. It has to do with continuing to coordinate with the state, even while they're waiting for our plans and for their award from NTIA. And I think the answer here is yes. I mean, if tribal broadband program is going to fund your tribe, it's really important that you tell the state that you are funded. They may not know, they may not be tracking. And it's important for them to understand what infrastructure you may have, because they may want to piggyback off of that, right? Solving, especially out in Alaska, you guys are out in you have islands, you got unique terrain, especially where Port Lions is located. Denise, if there's an opportunity to share information, that's really what this process is about. We recognize tribal data, and sharing can also be concerns in working with your states. So I do want to acknowledge that. But at the same time, if we're funding you, or you're waiting, or there's an intention to fund, there's nothing wrong with you sharing that with the state.
And you should. Don't just wait until Adam says yes or no. If you're still pending, tell the state that, right? So that they know that, and what they'll probably do is say, well, our assumption is that Adam's a great guy and he's going to approve this awesome project, right? But whether it gets approved or not, the state has the knowledge that that component of the total coverage plan is there. And if it winds up not being a perfect fit for this round or for the tribal program generally, that doesn't mean it won't be a good fit for BEAD.
Right. Good call. The next one is about the total amount of money needed to build broadband networks across the U.S. and if we've actually truly quantified that number. But I'm going to kind of and Kevin asked this question, Kevin Sievert. I'm going to twist this one a little bit in the context of beyond NTIA dollars, should states be including more than just BEAD, digital equity, or middle mile in their plans? And I guess that's a question for you, Evan.
Yes. So if you look at the notice funding opportunity, it lists a bunch of different federal programs that can be used either as match or that can be combined. Even aside from combining them on the same project, we strongly encourage states to make as much progress as they can with the dollars they have in hand and the programs they're running right now with their American Rescue Plan dollars, whether that's capital projects or state and local fiscal recovery funds, whether it was funding that came through the consolidated appropriation. There are a lot of different buckets of money that have gone out, USDA Reconnect, that have gone out in the last couple of years to support broadband. And the way this was described by my colleague at Treasury was, different waves going up the beach as the tide comes in. And so, you'll make some progress with capital project funds that you used. You'll make some progress with state or local fiscal recovery funds that you use. And then BEAD is the tide coming in, right? And we're going to get all the way there. But remember that if you wind up with with extra money after finishing the infrastructure work under BEAD, you don't lose it. Instead, that's more money that we get to spend on also critically needed digital equity programming. And so the wisest thing to do is for states and territories to hedge their bets and to make as much progress as they can on broadband infrastructure using the dollars they have in hand so that we can be certain that they're going to get the best, highest quality infrastructure when we're building under BEAD. And then they've got a ton of resources so they can support digital equity programming.
Awesome. So there you go, guys. I think it's use every doggone nickel that's out there. I think is kind of the message here. Treasury dollars, USDA funds, FCC funds, there's even instances where industry is stepping in, putting private dollars to work. So, don't be shy. And again, this is why I think it's time for everybody to kind of bring their resources to the table. Hopefully you're all willing to do that and really address the digital divide. So we don't believe that any one funding source is the answer. We believe that it's going to take, as Evan said, a whole host of those to get this done. The next one, Ms. Sutherland out of Alaska. In terms of the definition of tribal lands for BEAD, Lisa, what I'm just going to share with you is that similar to the tribal broadband program, the state of Alaska as a whole is technically considered tribal lands by the Department of Interior. And as Evan mentioned, for the state of Alaska, there's language in the BEAD NOFO that you should pay attention to with regards to certification and how that plan needs to work, which is different than the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, which is different than the tribal lands in the lower 48. And so it's not quite as blanketed as maybe the question was asked, but I'm going to encourage you to take a look there. And again, I guess the other thing that I'll say is that we are using these questions to inform FAQs that will be published into the future as well. So, as we move through it, I'm going to spend about another 15 minutes. But if we don't get to everybody's question today, that doesn't mean that we won't respond in some regards through our FAQ process. It may not be verbatim, but you guys, many of you have been through this with us here over the last couple of years, so I don't think it's anything new. Is there any talk about the use of electric power lines for communications as opposed to fiber optics? And I think this is probably for Evan, Sarah, and you guys all weigh in on this. I think I actually heard a question like this earlier today during our assistant secretary's hearing regarding solutions and being solution agnostic. But so I'm going to couch that even more broadly. Do we have a preference, or are we open to exploring solutions besides fiber?
Fiber is the primary option under BEAD. So if there's a fiber project and it's otherwise a viable project, then that's what we're going to build. And the reason for that is there are very few unknowns as regards fiber. They're very long-lived assets, and they're scalable in terms of speed way beyond current median usage. So the gold standard currently is fiber. I have seen some of the work over the years that people have done around digital connectivity over power lines, digital connectivity over legacy copper. digital connectivity, over upfitted coax networks. There are a lot of, and then the wide slew of wireless technologies that are out there. Those are all cool, right? From just a technology interest standpoint, all of that is pretty neat. We're going to focus on proven out technologies that are both proven out from a technological standpoint, but also from a financial and economic model standpoint. We want to make sure that anything we invest in will be both technologically sustainable and financially sustainable. And so, I'm not aware of anybody who's doing a lot of business providing the kind of speeds we're talking about over copper, though I defer to my colleagues if either of y'all, are aware of anything like that.
I've seen some interesting solutions, but in terms of meeting the long-term, scalable, sustainable, right, fiber is the gold standard. Sarah, do you have anything you want to add from the middle mile perspective?
No, we were specifically technology agnostic. We're accepting all kinds of solutions. We didn't even say what the minimum bandwidth is, and that's because depending on how many end users you intend to connect, it could be petabits per second, terabits per second. It might just be a gigabit per second. So we're accepting all types of technology. And in fact, we left, like I said, we expect you who know how to serve the underserved and unserved to be the ones telling us how this should get done. So we've got an option in the middle mile application called other. If it's not fiber and it's not wireless and something other, you've got that ability to do it. We are looking, like, I can't echo loudly and often enough what both Adam and Evan have stated, that we're looking for fiscally sustainable and projects that are going to be, scalable over time. But yeah, we are completely tech agnostic, looking at everything.
Yep. So I guess I just wanted to say we have a lot of I think of our colleagues on from Alaska. So I think all of this is being said from the perspective of what the preference is for fiber where we can. But there's also the recognition here at NTIA that there are absolutely going to be instances where that may not be the answer, which is why I think Evan highlighted the flexibility with state plans to really come up with, right? I mean, I'm just going to use Alaska as an example. Not every corner of Alaska is going to receive fiber. I think that is a fair statement to make. I've talked to enough of you guys from Alaska, whether it's village corporations, regional corporations, or regional nonprofits. I have heard from many of you loud and clear. And so again, preference is always going to be the long-term sustainable capabilities, but we always have the caveat in the way that these programs are established to give us some flexibility when we run into those nuanced situations. So for those of you guys that are in Alaska that are hitting the roof right now, please don't. We recognize the nuances that some of you are faced with just purely based on topography and other issues that you're confronted. So next one, let's see here, difference between priority versus non-priority broadband project. Lisa had asked that question. I think we kind of already covered that one a little bit earlier. These programs always refer to tribal entities in terms of the lower 48. Alaska tribal lands are owned by village corporations, and tribes are usually the ones who are authorized to apply for the grants. How does this affect these grants in terms of tribal land requirements? I'm just going to quickly answer this one for BEAD, Evan. You guys go read the NOFO. I think that we could sit here and cite, but the gist of it is Alaska has a very unique treatment under the BEAD program in the way that we considered the regionality of the state. So we expounded upon and changed it up a little different from TBCP NOFO. So take a look at how we approach that. I think that it's a blend between recognizing the regions and also recognizing the trust relationship with the federally recognized tribal governments within Alaska. So check that out, Alaskans, please. What assurances are in place for tribes that will be competing with providers that may currently provide services in some areas of their territory and may try to include those lands in their own applications without consulting the tribes? And this is from Raphael. I mean, Evan, from the BEAD perspective, that shouldn't happen, right? I mean, nobody's going to be spending BEAD dollars on tribal lands without consent. Okay, so that one's addressed. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so that's this we come back to, nothing is going to happen without plans being published at every step of the way. And so, that's one of the places where, look, there's a give and a take. We're asking from you to be engaged and to closely review these plans and verify for us that they're going to serve your community well. If when you look at the plan, somebody's building some stuff on your land that you didn't talk, that you don't know anything about, that's a concern you should raise, right? And that, will put a stop to it.
Yep. Yeah. And then Sarah, from the middle mile perspective, right? I mean, the idea that somebody be running middle mile service through tribal lands without talking to them. I mean, what from the middle mile perspective, where are we at on that? I'm not sure if you can weigh in.
Well, again, we try to be agnostic in the type of technology and also and who's applying, right? So if it's a technology company, you might very well be competing with a tribal entity. That could happen. But I think in the business case, and there's a lot of information that we're looking for in the application between the executive summary and the level of need and the project purpose and benefits, that it would be, you would have to show that you have the ability to build across these lands.
Okay, so there you go. I mean, when we run it through its programmatic evaluation for middle mile, if you haven't demonstrated relationships in order to achieve rights of way and easements, it's going to be really hard for us to believe that project is viable. So I think that hopefully addresses the concerns for both the BEAD and middle mile, the infrastructure related deployments. Now we're into, Angie, some digital equity questions. So if a tribe receives, say, $50,000 as a digital equity planning grant, but only needs $10,000 to actually develop their plan, can they use the remaining $40,000 to do implementation of the plan?
You know what? That's a great
Good
question. Glad they raised it, but
Yeah.
I will have to get back to them on that answer.
All right, cheers to you, Lisa. That was we hadn't thought about that.
Great question.
Yeah. So we'll take it back, and I think that's when we'll probably look to an FAQ. I mean, shoot, if we can do it, we will. I mean, how about that, Lisa? If the flexibility is there and the lawyers let us get away with it, I don't see why we wouldn't.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, the intent is not, none of us want to hold on to this money. We want it out into the communities to do good work. So can Alaska tribes and Native corporations both apply for the digital equity planning funds? Another question out of Alaska, Angie.
Yes. The funds are, I mean, the funds are there.
The funds are there. It's a pretty big universe. So again, if you believe you're an eligible entity, we are going to encourage you to apply. And look, guys, worst case scenario, send in your LOI. If we don't believe you're eligible, then let us tell you that you're not. I mean, that's would be my suggestion to those of you that are on the fence. It's a simple letter to send in. It's not too labor intensive. Will tribes who submit a letter of intent for digital equity be allowed to designate a tribal consortium to apply on their behalf for the grant, like similar to a capital project fund? I think this kind of gets to what we talked about earlier, right, Angie? Like, It needs to really come from the entity, but they can identify who they actually want to do the work.
Yes, but it needs to be signed off by that leadership.
There you go. And then what allowances will there be for cybersecurity in these awards? And Stephanie was asking this question. That actually is a great question about cybersecurity and how we're treating cybersecurity from a digital equity standpoint, and then also from investments through BEAD and through middle mile. So maybe we'll go around the horn here. Angie, you want to go first?
Well, I mean, the digital equity planning grant, I mean, cybersecurity is a component. I mean, that is, as we bring more people online, I mean, there are, safety concerns. So that can definitely, and we encourage that to be part of the plan.
Awesome. I'm going to just digress for 2 seconds. I remember being on a phone, we were out at a conference 3 weeks ago at the Reservation Economic Symposium in Las Vegas. And a concerned father from Alaska came up and said, my village has never had internet before, and I'm really worried about the change in culture that may occur with our youth, So even from a cybersecurity standpoint there, those types of activities in your communities eligible, Angie? Can they include youth education on how to safely use the
Absolutely.
internet?
Our youth are so critical. I mean, that, so yes, absolutely. We want, everyone is at a different place in their journey to becoming a digital citizen. And as many resources and tools that we can provide that, as they come online, that they have to make sure that they're safe and, using it in a responsible way that helps improve their lives, right? Without harm. I mean, we don't want harm to come as a result of this.
Absolutely. So then from a infrastructure deployment standpoint, Evan, Sarah, you guys have any comments on the cybersecurity and inclusions in the plans or considerations in the middle mile application?
Sarah, you go ahead.
Like, who's going to get to it first? No, middle mile is infrastructure. So it's going to be like physical assets, fiber that you can't see, or wireless stuff and towers. But it is not the smarter, like if I wanted to geek out for a second, I think it's the pipes that middle mile contemplates. And cybersecurity is up there on the stack. And so we're not contemplating cybersecurity in the middle mile infrastructure. We're just doing the connectivity to get to the internet backbone.
Awesome.
The one piece I will add there is that there are some standards that you can see related to equipment that exist now and will be updated. But by and large, what Sarah said is dead on, right? A fiber is a fiber is a fiber, at least until you hit the cabinet. But the cybersecurity lives in operations, in software. There are going to be a couple of rules about, especially some foreign devices. I mean, you've already seen some of the rules that are imposed by our colleagues in other agencies federally around, certain pieces of foreign equipment that may have compromised firmware, but that already exists outside of these programs, or at least, in the environment in which these programs operate.
Yeah, I think there's probably also going to be some heavy considerations for domestically sourced equipment where possible, right? This next one is about finding their state points of contact. We talked a lot about state plans for digital equity and state plans for the BEAD program, and likely working in consortiums for the middle mile and working with your states. So anybody want to take on how do they figure out who their point of contact is for each state? Right now, we at NTIA are going to have folks in every state as well, and territory across our teams. There's tribal folks, there's digital equity folks, there's BEAD folks, there's middle mile folks. But I believe this question is really about who do I talk to in my local state and how do I figure that out? Anybody want to tackle that?
I think the first point of contact is they can go to our website at Broadband USA, and we do list the broadband office contacts that are there for each state. So that would probably be the first resource that I would go to.
Okay. Any other follow-ups from Evan or Sarah? Okay. All right. If you guys hit a wall, I realize there's a lot of tribal stakeholders on here. You can always send me an email, and we will, like I said, guys, we'll get you to where we need to get you. So don't feel like you got to float in the ethers there. What else? NTI defining, we already covered that. Middle mile applications also go through the state as subawards. Oh, it's a good question. All right, Sarah. So it looks like middle mile has a lot of interest here, and the question is, can tribes independently apply to middle mile, or is this another program that runs through the state? It seems to be the question.
Yeah, no, please apply directly. This is open to tribes, tribal entities, as well as states, political subdivisions, and it's open to partnerships of tribes and states and tech companies and ISPs and electrical co-ops and a lot of different organizations.
Awesome. And then for those of you that are monitoring the chat, thank you, Macy, our unsung Vanna there. She has posted the resources for the states. So if you're curious on, where am I supposed to go, etc., she just put the link in the chat, folks. So check that out. let's see here. What else do we have? Do all unserved areas in the entire United States have to get funded before any other unserved anchor institution? I think we already covered that one, Lisa. Any suggestions on how tribes with pending applications approach these opportunities? Luke, I think we mentioned this before. If you're pending, you're pending. Tell your states that you're pending. Don't hold back on applying for digital equity. And if you want to apply for middle mile, don't hold back on that either. The best thing that you could do is be awarded by multiple agencies or funding streams. We all talk. Let us sort those things out on the back end if you're concerned about that. Let's see here. Can tribes that already applied for middle mile deployment via last year's TBC program apply for middle mile grant program this year? Sarah?
Yes, please do. Like Adam just said, apply. And if you're awarded in one and not the other, we'll arrange that. We talk to each other, we'll figure it out, but apply, please.
So, let's see here. What else? Please explain the FCC mapping issue and how that, excuse me, and how that will delay the preparation of proposals in the awarding of grants. And that's from Michael.
So I don't think it's going to delay the awarding of grants necessarily. We need the FCC maps so that we can determine how much each state will get, because the amount of money each state and territory has will in a pretty significant way affect the plan that they develop to serve all their unserved folks. And so that exercise has to be completed. Our colleagues at FCC are working really hard on it. I want to emphasize how hard a job it is. So that somebody is doing it at all is impressive. And they've done it pretty quickly. So in the context of what it is. And so, that's going to come out toward the end of this year on a day. And then we'll start improving it. We all collectively will start improving it. The agency is going to make a determination about how much funding people get based on those maps. But even just on the first draft, states and territories will have a ballpark. The map, they're not going to be wild or drastic changes to the maps. And so as a result of the challenge processes. And so, that would be, to me, the gun on planning has already fired, because states should be thinking about what do we need to develop our 5-year plan, which is a plan that they can write in the absence of the FCC maps. Then the FCC maps come out, that gives them more insight. Then the maps are finalized and the allocations are made. That gives even more insight. And then the initial plan comes forward. That can happen pretty early in this process. And then the initial plan is approved. That contemplates the subgrantee selection process. That process runs. Then we know what the projects are. That gets approved. Projects move. It's infrastructure, guys. It isn't going to happen overnight. One of the things that I want to emphasize here is that even after projects are approved, these are going to be multi-year builds. You don't get a high, when I was doing this job for the state of Virginia, one of the things that I got a question about was, at the beginning of the pandemic, well, if we gave you all the money you needed, could you get it done? Could you get broadband to every single home and business in 6 months? No, no, not with unlimited money. No, it's akin to asking, could we have built, with unlimited funds, could we have built the interstate highway system, all in 1 year in the 1950s? No, it is going to take a little time. I wish we're going to go as fast as we possibly can and be sure we're going to get it right.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good point. And, I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about FCC maps, map validation. If tribes have homes, how do they submit information to the FCC, et cetera? Evan, I'm wondering, just based on the feedback here, one thing, here's what we'll commit to. No promises, but we'll commit to trying. I think there is a need to maybe chat with our partners at the FCC, and maybe we can host a webinar around the process as a whole for folks that want to just understand that a little bit more, because I'm seeing just a lot of questions.
I think
understandably so. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think for everybody on the line, that's what this team will commit to doing is raising the issue to our colleagues at the FCC and seeing if we can't have a webinar specifically around the mapping activities and what to expect. Great questions. I apologize, we're not gonna be able to get to every single one of them, but a couple more. This one's from Anna Hoheg. Anna, I hope you're doing well. If that's the same Anna that I've known from years ago, great to see you on. Sarah had mentioned that the middle mile allows for up to $50,000 in pre-application costs. Do the other programs also allow for pre-application costs? And I'm going to add a dovetail to that. Sarah, that means if the application is awarded, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So then I guess the question is for pre-application expenses for BEAD, Evan. We're essentially funding the pre-application with the planning dollars, right? $5 million to every state and territory.
Yeah, in part. I mean, there's also an administrative costs provision for, you know, the later funding that states get. But at this stage, you know, I think that the $5 million should be more than adequate, both to cover costs related to the application preparation and build capacity in state and territory offices. That second piece is the more important of the two. We have designed these applications. We've made these as easy to engage with as we can in the federal government still exists, right? And it has its requirements. And so, and these are big, complicated undertakings. And so to properly describe them requires a fair amount of detail. But these applications are designed to be as user-friendly as they possibly can be. And, you know, it's our sincere hope that folks will take seriously the rules and scoring mechanisms that are available at each step in the game, and if they undertake costs to prepare applications, that they do that having developed a project that has a very high likelihood of success.
Awesome.
And for digital equity, I mean, there's no pre-planning application expenses that you have to incur except to just use the template and send us an email. Again,
those templates and the Dear Tribal Leader letter are going out tomorrow, along with a sample of suggested activities with those as well. So no pre-app there. Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program did allow for pre-application preparation expenses. And we are going to obviously be consulting on another NOFO into the future. If tribes believe that was beneficial, which I know a lot of you did include that in your applications, then I think we're happy to entertain continuing keeping those aspects of the program alive if tribes found that as beneficial. But for the TBCP program, we will be consulting on a number of issues. And if that's something of importance, please express that when we engage in our consultations. And by the way, we're probably going to be doing 3 of them. So it's not going to be a one and done when we do engage in our consults in the future. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. One of the questions that I've seen pop up a couple of times that I think is particularly relevant to the audience is regarding the match for the middle mile program. And so I just wanted to make clear there is a match that's being asked for by applicants, and tribal entities have the right to request a waiver of that. When you read through the NOFO, and we'll talk about this, we're going to have webinars talking about the application, but right now in the merit review, you can get up to 15 points for match. And so the question is, how many, if a tribal entity has invoked that request for a waiver, what does that mean point wise? And what we'll actually do, rather than awarding 15 points to the tribal entity or to that applicant who's requested a waiver, is instead of scoring out of 100, we will score it out of 85, and then we will mark it up 1.1765, I think, to true it up to just about 100. So I hope that I saw that question pop up a couple of times, and I hope that explains things, but I thought it was important to make sure that I pointed that out. Thank you, Adam.
Absolutely. So, you know, I realize we still have a few more questions that have been posed, but I think generally we've covered most of the topics. And so, you know, what I'd like to do is just give each of our program leadership here an opportunity just to make a closing comment or statement if there's anything you guys wanted to convey before we go ahead and wrap things up. So we'll go ladies first, Evan, if that's okay. And Angie, would you mind going first?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I just really want to say thank you to everyone for joining today. And I mean, I think the one takeaway that everyone should have is that we are here to be supportive and to remove as many barriers as possible for the tribal community to receive access to funds. And so there's a huge commitment. And so if you have any questions, I mean, this is not just lightly, please reach out to us and we are there to be supportive.
Awesome. Thanks, Angie. Sarah.
I echo that we are here. And the other point I would make on the middle mile program, at least $1 billion, there have been some comments that it's just $1 billion and that's not going to be enough. And we know it's probably not going to be enough. And that's really, really sad. But that's why I wholeheartedly encourage you. This is not, it is a competitive grant program. So partner, don't compete with your neighbors, work together hand in hand and create a bigger, greater level of need and project purpose and beneficiaries. That's my advice on the middle mile program. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Sarah. Evan.
First, thank you so much. It's a rare and impressive person already who will do more than an hour public policy webinar. And so you're already, A+ citizens and students. Please stay engaged. This level of engagement is going to be necessary for this project to succeed. And at the end of it, we're all going to feel really good because we're all going to have solved this problem that has bedeviled our communities for decades now. Like, it's time for it to not be true anymore that some people have one standard of living and some people have another, at least as regards this piece of it that we're able to get our hands on. So, let's get every one of our friends, neighbors, families, members of our community online. Let's do that together and then put this problem in the solved category.
Awesome. Matt Rogotsky, I'm going to ask you to come on real quick. For those of you that have not met Matt, Matt is leading our tribal state cohort coordination. So for those of you that are wondering, is everybody just floating around out there? I mean, the answer is no. We're actually trying to bring tribes and states together. We have an event coming up here in a few weeks. Matt, I was hoping you could touch on that real quick and a little bit about the cohort. And then with that, we'll go ahead and conclude. So Matt, over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Adam. Yeah, and great job to all the panelists. You guys did a great job answering all the questions. Yeah, got a lot of work ahead of us. But yeah, so we host a state tribal cohort with state broadband advisors from the 36 states with federally recognized tribes, trying to get folks organized on the state front, working with their tribal liaisons as well. So we've hosted, I think, 2 meetings so far, hosting another one next week on federal permitting in tribal lands. And then we're going to just keep the conversations going on throughout the process, as I'm sure lots of questions will pop up. So we're trying to get state folks ready to engage with the tribal folks as well. And then in the future, we're going to also be hosting a tribal broadband leaders network as well with tribal folks. So trying to get just a regular dialogue for folks to get their questions answered, because everyone had a lot today. There's a lot to answer, and I'm sure that as we go through this process, there will be more. So excited to keep talking with everyone, and hopefully this helps serve that need. So thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Matt. Matt's going to be a familiar face for a lot of folks out there. He's worked in Indian country before as well. So we're really excited to have Matt as part of the team helping us with our outreach. And Macy, I'm going to ask you to pop on real quick. For those of you that have never met Miss Macy, she is our lady behind the scenes making all this happen. Macy, thank you for bringing the webinar together. Matt as well. And Carol, if you mind popping on as well. We have a lot of help to make these things happen. So I just wanted to say publicly thank you from our team. For all the tribal leaders that stayed on for today, thank you for being a part of this. As always, our door is open. Our phones will ring and we will absolutely answer them. If you have questions, as you've heard everybody say, get engaged. We will help get you where you need to go. There's lots of money. Let's not leave it on the table, and let's start to really, not that we haven't been, but let's continue to work together to solve the digital divide. So appreciate everybody's time with that and Shun Lovick. And thanks again for attending today's webinar session. It'll be recorded, slides will be posted. Look for your Dear Tribal Leader letter tomorrow, and let's see those LOIs coming in the door. So appreciate everybody's time. Thank you.
Thank you.